Welcome. My name is Rebecca Brown. I am with the National Network of Libraries of Medicine Training Office. This recording is called How PubMed Works, Automatic Term Mapping. Let's take a look at our agenda. I'm going to start with some search tips from the National Library of Medicine about using the main search box in PubMed. We're going to look at search details in depth today. I'll also talk about how to search for phrases, which is one of my favorite topics, but my focus is on automatic term mapping and how it helps you make the most of the programming behind PubMed's search box. ATM is PubMed's behind-the-scenes process that kicks in automatically when you enter terms into the search box without any qualifiers such as tags or quotation marks. I'm going to talk about the order of ATM operation, the translation tables, and the formats that ATM recognizes to find your search terms. That said, I'll also demonstrate how to bypass ATM when it's not doing what you want. All right, so I'm going to start with some search tips about how to use the search box effectively. When you enter your search terms, the most important thing for PubMed searches is to be as specific as possible for a couple of reasons. First, the indexers use the most specific term available when they apply mesh terms to an article. And secondly, the more terms you use, the narrower your search will be and the fewer results you'll retrieve. Focusing on significant keywords is a good approach. You don't need to use any punctuation, such as quotation marks, at least for your first pass at the search. You don't need to use any Boolean operators. PubMed will add them automatically. Number 4, there's no need to capitalize, plain and simple. 5, PubMed can recognize and find phrases for you, and I'll show you how to determine if the phrase is indexed a little later. An NLM suggests that you start your search without using search tag, such as TIAB for title and abstract or AU for author, because tags turn off ATM. And then lastly, PubMed is smart, or at least the people who program it are. PubMed can distinguish between subject words, journal titles, and author names based on years' worth of data, and we're going to look into great detail today as to how PubMed does that. This slide is a screenshot of the general search box in the new PubMed. It lets you do what some might call a keyword search, but in a sophisticated way because of how the box is programmed. This slide shows a search that I did for indigestion, abdominal pain using the general search box. To view the search details, click on the advanced link that's just below the search box, and then you'll scroll down to your history and details section and click on the right-facing caret, that's C-A-R-A-T, to view full details. This slide shows the complete view of search details. I entered 3 words, but as you can see in the search details, PubMed did more than just look for those 3 words, and that's ATM in action. So what do we see here? We see that indigestion mapped to dyspepsia, the mesh term, and that will bring in Medline citations. That gets ORed with dyspepsia in all fields, so that will bring in non-Medline citations. plus citations that will eventually be Medline citations but have not yet been indexed. Then it goes on to include dyspepsias plural in all fields. And PubMed does not ignore the search terms that you use. So it's going to search for indigestion in all fields, as well as indigestion plural in all fields. And that's the very first part of our search, all connected to indigestion. Then that gets ANDed with abdominal pain, the mesh term, once again bringing in Medline citations. And that is ORed with abdominal, ANDed with pain. So what happens here with automatic term mapping is when there is a two-word mesh term, such as abdominal pain, a two or more word mesh term, I should say, ATM breaks up the term into its pieces, searches for each part in all fields, and did together with the other parts. So in theory, abdominal and pain may be right next to each other in a citation, but they may not be. And then finally, that is ORed with abdominal pain as a phrase, kept together, searched in all fields, which will bring in the non-Medline and soon to be indexed citations. All right, so let's look even deeper at what goes on behind the scenes when automatic term mapping kicks in. When you search without quotes or tags, PubMed tries to match your terms against 3 translation tables that have been developed from the data in PubMed. And when I say data, I mean things like subject words such as indigestion, journal titles, and author names. NLM refers to these as tables, but you might also envision them as an index in the back of a book. The tables are lists of words, journal details, and author names that appear in PubMed. The 3 translation tables are subjects, journals, and authors, and that's the order that automatic term mapping goes in. Notice the conveyor belts I have on the bottom of the slide. That's meant to represent the ATM process. When you put your search terms into the search box, think of them as being on a conveyor belt that stops at each translation table in the order we see on the slide. ATM first tries to map your terms to the subject table, a subject such as indigestion or abdominal pain, for example. If the term maps to mesh, the term will get off the conveyor belt and processing on that term is complete. In the indigestion search example, both indigestion and abdominal pain would get off the conveyor belt because they both mapped to mesh, as we saw in search details. Those 2 terms would not move on to the next translation table. However, all remaining terms will continue on the conveyor belt to the second stop, which is the journal translation table. The journal table is a list of all PubMed journal titles, not just Medline journals. The journal table includes the full journal title, the official NLM journal title abbreviations, and ISSN numbers. If a match is found for a journal title, the title gets off the conveyor belt and processing on that title is complete. Whatever terms are left will now continue on to the third stop, which is the author translation table. And again, if a match is found in the author table, the author name gets off the conveyor belt, and if no match is found, any remaining terms will be searched in all fields, which includes article titles, abstracts, author keywords, and more. And remember, PubMed does not search full text. Okay, so we're going to take an even closer look at the subject table, which is the first stop on the conveyor belt. PubMed will look at all of these sources to try to find a match for your terms during the first stop. It's going to look at mesh headings, entry terms, subheadings, supplementary concepts, publication types, and the Unified Medical Language System. And this may be a new source of information to you. UMLS is a large vocabulary system comprised of a number of medical vocabularies from different disciplines. For example, the health insurance industry has a vocabulary, and the laboratory industry, where we get our blood drawn, they also have a vocabulary. And these are part of UMLS, which works behind the scenes. So sometimes your terms will map to mesh, but it may not be obvious how it mapped. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So here I am in mesh, and I've typed in the two-word term shin bone, and I'm going to search mesh. It maps correctly to tibia, but if we scroll to see the entry terms, shin bone is not listed here. And that's because the mapping is pulled in from the UMLS vocabulary. But really, the bottom line is if your terms map to mesh correctly, we don't need to care how that mapping occurred. Although sometimes someone might ask you that question, so it's always good to know. Okay, so I'm going to head into PubMed right now and do some exercises. You can follow along if you would like by stopping the recording and heading into PubMed and doing the exercise as well. I'm going to start by searching in PubMed for the term backache, one word. No quotes, no tags. And then I'm going to go to Advanced Search, which is the link directly below the search box. And I'm going to make my way down to Search Details. And here's my search, and I'm going to expand it. And let's see what PubMed did. So it appears that the mesh term for backache is back pain, and that will bring in our Medline citations. And because the mesh term is two words, like I said earlier, such as with abdominal pain, ATM breaks up the two-word term into pieces, adds them together, searches in all fields, and then that gets ORed with back pain in all fields to bring in non-Medline citations and the yet-to-be-indexed Medline citations. And then lastly, that's ORed with, well, almost lastly, backache. This is the term that I use, both here now singular and plural, are searched in all fields. And that's all from one word. So I have a question for you that you'll have to go in to Mesh and take a look. What does not appear in the search details box? I'll wait for you to answer. If you have reviewed the Mesh video, you would know that search details does not show that behind the scenes, PubMed is also searching for citations that have been indexed with all the narrower or exploded terms that fall below back pain. So let's take a look. So I'm back in Mesh. I'll search for backache. I'm going to choose back pain. I'm going to scroll down to the tree. And yes, there are two narrower terms, failed back surgery syndrome and low back pain. This means we can expect that some of the citations in our results will include articles that have been indexed with these two narrower mesh terms. So to recap, we searched for a single term in PubMed, namely backache, and I'll jump back there. Backache mapped to the mesh term back pain, which is in the subject translation table. And remember, once a term maps to a translation table, processing on the term stops. PubMed won't look for it in the other translation tables, and we'll see why that's important to know in just a moment. Before we investigate the journal table, I want to show you a couple of examples of the enhanced term mapping in the new PubMed. So using the query box here, I'm going to search for pediatrics. In the query box, I'm going to search for pediatrics. And again, I'm going to go through advanced to review search details. And we see here that PubMed now includes British or alternate spellings. So the AE version, so pediatrics, anesthesiology, um, orthopedics. These are common words that are spelled differently in British English. Also another example, I'm going to search for the word lunch, which is a mesh term. Going back to search details. And we see lunch is a mesh term. Also, plurals have been added to the new PubMed and ATM. So we're going to have lunches, lunching, and these help expand your search. All right, so let's move on. So the terms that didn't map to the subject table will continue on to the next stop, which is the journal table. And let me jump back to my slides. PubMed's general search box and ATM are programmed to recognize full journal titles, Medline title abbreviations, and ISSN numbers. And when you use an ISSN number, when you search with one, you need to use the dashes. If you enter just a piece of a journal title, an unofficial piece, PubMed will not find a match in the journal table. So let's give that a try, and you can open up a browser to do the exercise as well. All right, so I'm going to search for the New England Journal of Medicine. And here in the summary view, I do see that the journal title appears to be correct. We got a little over 79,000, well, almost 80,000 results. Numbers will change over time. I'm going to advanced, and I'm going to go to my search details, and I see that the New England Journal of Medicine mapped to, but this is really the Medline abbreviation in the journal table. That part is correct, and that will bring in all citations from the journal. But the second piece is the New England Journal of Medicine searched in all fields, and that will bring in mentions of this particular journal. Well, in this case, in this example, I'm not interested in mentions of the journal. I want citations from the journal. So in order to run a more targeted search here, I'm going to copy just the correct piece, or the piece that does what I want it to do. I'm going to plop that into the query box. It's basically tagging that journal title. And once we tag something, we're turning off ATM. I'm going to run that search. We get, I don't know, about 500 or 600 fewer results. And if we look at search details one more time, it's going to show that PubMed did exactly what we asked it to do. And those would be all citations from the New England Journal of Medicine, not just mentions of the journal. All right, so now for the fun part. Let's just enter the words New England Journal. No tags, no quotes. And we see here this first journal is correct. But here's another journal title and another journal title that is not the journal we're looking for. Yes, I see it in the title, but I'm trying to bring in citations. However, I used an unofficial piece of the title. It's not the full title. It's not the official Medline abbreviation, nor is it the ISSN. So let's see what happened here. We got over 200,000 results, which we already know the real number is around 79,000. So this search went awry. New England is apparently a mesh term, the geographic region. Journal mapped to periodicals. So this is completely wrong. And this was designed to drive home the point that you need to use, like I said before, the full title, Medline title, or the ISSN, because that's what the journal table is programmed to recognize. That is what the journal table includes, and that is what ATM will recognize. So as we saw earlier, ATM isn't foolproof, and a problem can arise with some journal titles because they are also mesh terms. Journals such as Gene, Cell, Blood, Nature, Science, those are all examples of journal titles that are also mesh terms. So let's see what ATM does when we search for the journal title Cell. I'm just going to go back to the home page using the logo on the right here. Let's search for Cell, untagged. If we look at the results, I do see Cell in the title of some of the citations here, but we want citations from the journal. And I see JAMA, I see other titles here. Let's look at search details. Search details shows us that cell mapped to cells as a mesh term, etc., etc. It's not what we wanted. We don't really care about the rest of this. And this happened because the first stop in ATM is the subject table, which contains mesh terms. And so this mapping is actually correct. It's just not what we wanted. And since once a term maps, it gets off the conveyor belt, it will never make it to the journal table. So the question is, how can we adjust our search to find citations from this particular journal? Or in other words, how can we turn off ATM for this particular term and force PubMed to look for our term as a journal title? Well, there are a couple of ways you can do that. We can tag it as journal. So I'm just going to do this, type cell into the query box, type journal. You can either have a space or no space between your tag and your term. Doesn't make a difference, but you do need all the letters. Going to run that search. We get 20,385 results. Let's go into advanced search, find the details. We see that PubMed did exactly what we told it to do. Look for this word in the journal table, and it returned results. We can also go to the advanced search builder. We can choose journal from the drop-down list. Type in cell. I'm not going to run the search. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the show index button. And it shows about the same number of citations, 20,604. That's how many results we would get if we ran this search. And if you happen to know the ISSN number, I'm just going to put this back to all fields. You can put it in the query box with your dash, run that, and there we have that same number of results we got when we tagged it journal. Now we're going to talk about the third stop, which is the author table. I know that many people search by author or try to find all citations by a particular author. And we also know that that can be a frustrating process. Searching for an author's name is the #1 type of search people do in PubMed. So understanding how ATM recognizes a name will help you run a more successful author search. That said, searching for an author may still be imperfect. The author index contains all author names going back to 1946. If you wrote an article that's indexed in PubMed, your name is included in the author index. NLM suggests searching with the last name and the first initial to run the most comprehensive search. However, you can use up to 2 initials because the author index includes up to 2 initials for authors when that information has been provided by publishers. And we'll do some sample searches in just a bit. You can also search with an author's full name in natural or inverted order, but this will run a considerably less comprehensive search. And the reason for that, NLM began accepting full names in 2002, and they did not go back to retroactively index citations. And more importantly, only some journal publishers submit the full name, making this a much less effective search strategy. In addition to the author index, there's also an investigator index. Investigators are people who help with the research, but not the writing of the article. Searching for an investigator name is the same as searching for an author. You don't need to specify that you want to search the investigator index. ATM will do that for you automatically, and we'll see an example of that in a moment. All right, so I'm back in PubMed, and I'm going to run some author searches in a few different ways. I'm going to start with a full name. This is William J. Jusko. No tags. This is natural order. I'm going to run that search. We get 214 results. We do see Jusko here in the summary view. I'm going to go to advanced search, my search details, and we see that the Jusko name was found in the author index. We typed in the full name, and ATM seems to have recognized that. What might we be missing in this search by searching with the full name? If I go back to my slides, the full name index began in 2002. So any citations, any articles written by Dr. Jusko prior to 2002 would not be pulled in by searching with his full name. So how might we run this search to make sure we are bringing in all citations written by this author? And again, I will jump back to my slides. NLM suggests that we search with the last name and first initial for the most comprehensive search. So let's give that a try. Last name, first initial, no tags. This time we get 590 results, and we're going to go to advanced, search details, and we see that yes, PubMed did what we wanted. the name mapped to the author table. So at first glance, that author search was successful and comprehensive. Well, let's try a search with a hyphenated name. Going to put that into the query box, Mr. Juan Gomez Reno. And you can either use the hyphen or not use the hyphen. It does not matter as far as a name goes. So I'm just going to leave it here. This is a full name in natural order. I'm going to run that search. We get 221 results. And let's again kind of confirm what's going on by going into search details. So the first part of this search, and this is ATM in action, actually showed us that it misinterpreted or included a wrong search here by showing that the last name is Reno, and then the first name or first and middle name, it's hard to know what's happening here, was included in our search. So that's wrong. But that got OR'd with which matches the search that we wanted. First name Juan, last name Gomez Reno. And then lastly, we see that ATM also found this name in the investigator table. So most of this is correct. Once again, we can just copy the correct piece, put that into the search box. We had 221. Let's see what this changes. Just 3 results left, 2 less, so we weren't off too much. Now this was one way to fix our search, but another way to fix the search is to take a cue from what we see from search details, and we can use a comma. So I'm just going to, let's just take all of this out. And I'll even put the hyphen back in. How about that? So if we had initially entered our full name in inverted order and using a comma to indicate which was the last and which was the first name, let's see what happens. We get those same 219 results. And we see, okay, this is correct. We see it was found as an investigator. Gomez Reno, I'm not sure I see a difference here. Nor here. So it just looks like it repeated itself for whatever reason. But it still brought in that same number of results. And that's what we wanted. All right, so I have one more search to do with this name, and this time let's try and run the more comprehensive search with just the last name and first initial. All right, here's our last name and first initial. No punctuation this time. And let's see what happens. This time we get 340 results. And let's look at search details. Everything looks correct to me here. They found the name in the author table and the investigator table. So that works for me. But the question is, do all 340 of these results really belong to our Juan Gomez Reno? PubMed does try to help us figure that out with a feature called Computed Author Sort. And to use this Computed Author Sort feature, the first thing we're going to do is pull up any citation by this author in abstract view. So I'm going to click on 340 here in the results so I can run that search again and look at these results. We do see his name there. in the list of authors, but this is the summary view. So I'm going to click on the title to get to the abstract view. And I'm going to locate his name in the list of authors. He's number 22. I'm going to expand the affiliations section and find number 22. So I did a little research about this particular author's name preparing for this recording, just like you would do when you were searching for an author. You might, if you were asked to find all citations, you might want to know, where did this person work? Have they published under different names? What is their topic of research? And that's all information that can help you identify or disambiguate one author from another. So I did some research, and I do know that this particular person lives in Spain, and he appears to be a rheumatologist. So we're going with that. So once we click on a citation that belongs to our author, we then find his name again in the abstract view and click on his name. That is going to run the computed author sort. So we see a message here that says results are displayed in a computed author sort order. And usually we could narrow or filter our results by using the timeline available on the left side, but that's not available when you run this type of search. Now, the computer sort author compares citations with the same author name, and the similarity for each citation pair is measured by examining the metadata for both citations, including things such as co-authors, the journals they published in, words from the title, affiliation, the abstracts, the content of the abstracts, mesh terms assigned to the citations, grants that they may have been associated with, and publication dates. That is all part of an algorithm that runs behind the scenes to help us disambiguate author names. Now, in this first title, our author published using just his first initial. You see that here in the list of authors. In the second citation here, we see his name with first and middle initial. But if I click on that title and I click on the affiliation, which is 4, I'm going to expand that. I see that again, a Department of Rheumatology in Spain. The computed author feature also takes advantage of Orchid Identifiers. These are unique numbers assigned to authors. They have to apply for these numbers at orcid.org. That's orcid.org. And if you know a particular author's OrcID, you can search using that. And I'll show you a couple of ways to do that. So I'm going to advanced search. I'm going to use the builder. And here you can choose author identifier. And I have an OrcID with no dashes when you use this builder. I'm going to use show index. And there's one citation for this particular author. So I'll go ahead and add that to my search just to pull that up. And that happens to belong to Nancy Shin. She is a coordinator for the Pacific Northwest region of the National Network of Libraries of Medicine. Now, if you were to use this general search box to search with an ORC ID, you would want to use dashes. You don't need to tag it, but you do need to use the dashes. And I'm going to run that again. And you can't really tell that anything happened, but it did. Because here it shows found one result, and then it shows that we've got our dashes. And if I go to advanced search, you see that I did actually run a couple of searches. You could also tag it if you use the tag AUID, author identifier. In this case, you don't need to use the dashes. It runs the search again. Once again, you can't tell anything happened because it found the very same one article, but it shows you right here that that's what it did. So generally use dashes in the general search box if you're not going to tag the ORC ID, or you can just plop it into the search builder without dashes. And you don't even need to tell it which field you're interested in. One last thing about searching for author names is how to search with a suffix, such as junior, senior, esquire. Some authors, and in this case generally men, use a suffix, and you would just add that to the end of their name. So I would search for Gates space W Junior, just like that. Takes me to a couple of citations that have this author's name with the suffix. So the takeaway message about searching for authors is use the last name with a space, then first initial for the most comprehensive search. And when we do that, the name will map to the author index, which covers all years of publication going back to at least 1946. You may find some earlier citations. All right, so just a few more things about automatic term mapping. Sometimes it does its job, but it doesn't map or translate your terms the way you intended, and we saw that with when we searched for the journal name Cell. And this is something that can happen when you search for phrases as well. So let's search for the phrase pressure point. 2 words, singular, no tags. And let's make our way into search details. Okay, we got 52,000 results. And the first thing we see is that pressure mapped to pressure, the mesh term. And then we see all sorts of variations of pressure, and then point, searched in all fields. But even though ATM seems to have done something for us, this is not what we wanted. We wanted the phrase kept together, 2 words. So in cases like this, where you have verified here in search details that ATM does not map to your phrase, it's at this point that NLM suggests using quotes around your phrase. So I will do that. I'll search again. So remember, we got 52,283 results. This time we got 166. And I do see pressure point, etc., etc. We'll go to search details. And search details shows us that PubMed kept our phrase together and searched for it in all fields. And that is what we wanted. Something to keep in mind, however, and this is an interesting piece of information, that using quotes does not guarantee PubMed will find the phrase as you entered it, unfortunately. So let's try another phrase. Let's search for growling stomach. A patient comes in complaining of a persistent growling stomach. So we're going to put that into the search box as is, no quotation marks at this point. We get 6 results. Now we do see here growling stomach. That could be relevant. There's stomach growling in the abstract in this one here. I see the word growling here, stomach growl. So some of these may be relevant, but there's only 6 and let's take a look in advance to see what happens. So remember, we're interested in finding the phrase growling stomach, and we only saw that, I think, in one of the citations. So ATM did its thing, but it's not what we wanted. Growling mapped to growls, the way that was interpreted, etc., etc. A stomach is a mesh term. That's nice, but it's not what we wanted. So let's try what we learned with pressure point, and let's put quotation marks around our phrase. And as I said, spelling counts. Okay, remember we got 6 results, and let's run this search. Well, we got 6 results again, but this time we have a message, quoted phrase not found. And it's the same 6 results, so it actually, the only place we found it together is up on top here. And if we go to search details, it did exactly the same thing as when we did not use quotation marks. So the question is, why did our pressure point search work with quotation marks, but growling stomach did not? Well, PubMed handles phrases differently than other databases. PubMed maintains an index or a list of phrases that appear frequently in the biomedical literature, and some people refer to it as the phrase index. And we can see that based on that one message we got, quoted phrase not found, PubMed doesn't recognize growling stomach as a phrase. If it were recognized, it would have kept the 2 parts, the 2 words together. So let me show you where to verify whether or not a phrase is indexed. So we're here in the advanced builder. It defaults to all fields. Let's put our growling stomach phrase in here. I'm not going to run the search, but I'm going to click on Show Index. This is our list of phrases. If growling stomach was an indexed phrase, it would be the first one on the list, but it's not. All right, so let's try pressure point and see why they behaved differently. Show index. Pressure point is an index phrase. This is what it looks like when a phrase is indexed. All these items here are indexed phrases. And not only do we see pressure point, but the index tells us how many results we would get. Bottom line, if the phrase you are looking for is not included in this list, PubMed cannot return results for your phrase. So I want to touch on automatic explosion just for a moment. So we've been talking about using quotation marks around phrases. However, you do need to be careful or intentional when you use quotes in PubMed. If you put quotes around a mesh term, both automatic term mapping and explosion of mesh terms will be turned off. So let's try an example to see how quotation marks around a mesh term can impact your search results. So here in the general search box, I'm going to search for health planning, no quotes, no tags. 464,000 results. I go to advanced search. I'll close this other one, open health planning. We see that it mapped to a mesh term. And then ATM did its thing, and I'm satisfied with this search. Now, this time, let's put quotation marks around that and run the search again. This time, we get a fraction of, a literal fraction of the results. So I'm going to go to advanced search to see what happened. So search details showed us that health planning was only searched in all fields. It didn't map to mesh. It didn't do this expanded piece here. And that is because we put quotation marks around a mesh term. We turned off ATM and we turned off automatic explosion. And what do I mean by automatic explosion? If we go into mesh and look at health planning, I'm going to search. I'm going to scroll down to see if there are narrower terms below our term, and there are a lot of narrower terms. And if you recall, when you search with a mesh term, all narrower terms below your term are included in your search, even though these terms do not appear in search details. We would expect that some of the 462,000 results that we got were for citations indexed with these narrower terms. And that is by design to help you bring in more relevant results. So while you are able to turn off automatic explosion from within the record for a particular search, a mesh term, or using quotation marks around it as we just did, NLM urges caution when turning off explosion because you may miss something relevant. Does your patron really only want citations indexed with health planning, or might they be interested in some of the other narrower terms here, regional health planning, community health planning? And I'll also point out that any terms that fall under health planning that have a plus sign, so this one here, health facility planning, healthcare services, that plus sign means that those terms also explode, and those explosions were also included in our health planning search, or would be without quotes. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is how to turn off ATM when it's not doing what you want. And we've talked about all these ways already. We can use quotation marks, and that's what we did with the pressure point search. You can use search tags, and we had to do that with our cell, the journal search. We added a tag to that. And you can use the advanced search builder to choose a particular field you want to search by. So you can choose the journal field. I'll just jump back there. You can choose journal. You can choose author identifier. You can choose mesh, even a number of different ways to do mesh, but generally choosing just the mesh term is the best way to go. So you can tag, use the builder, or use quotation marks to turn off ATM. Thanks for listening.